Just 66 years after two brothers flew for 12 seconds over a windy beach, human beings walked on the surface of the moon. It was one of the greatest achievements in all of history, but the machine that carried them there was born not as a dream of exploration, but as a weapon of terror, and the genius who built it had first built it for Adolf Hitler. This is the story of the rocket, of how the same technology that rained silent death on the cities of Europe became the ladder that humanity climbed to the stars. And it is the story of a dark and uncomfortable bargain made at the dawn of the space age that we still argue about today. Because the road to the moon began in the darkest place imaginable. For centuries, flying to the stars was pure fantasy. But by the early 20th century, a handful of visionaries realized there might be a way. A rocket, unlike an airplane, carries its own oxygen, and so it can fly where there is no air at all. In the emptiness of space, the dream was real. The problem was building an engine powerful enough to break the chains of gravity. In Germany, a brilliant young engineer named Wernher von Braun led a team obsessed with that dream. They wanted to build rockets to reach space. But this was Nazi Germany, and the government had no interest in exploration. They wanted something else entirely. They wanted a weapon. And they offered von Braun the money and resources to build his rockets, in exchange for turning them into instruments of war. The result was the V2. It was a marvel of engineering, the first man-made object ever to cross the edge of space, and it was terrifying. Launched from Europe, it climbed silently into the sky, then fell faster than sound onto its target. There was no warning, no sound of approach, just a sudden, devastating explosion. It was used to bombard cities like London, killing thousands of civilians. But the V2 hides a horror even darker than the bombs it dropped. The rockets were built by prisoners, forced laborers from the concentration camps, worked to death in terrible underground factories. It is a staggering and sickening fact that more people died building the V2 in slavery and misery than were ever killed by the weapon itself. This is the true, terrible foundation of the space age. As the Second World War ended and Nazi Germany collapsed, a new race began. Both the United States and the Soviet Union understood that whoever captured the German rockets and the scientists who built them would command the future. They rushed to seize the technology, the hardware, and above all, the minds. And von Braun, seeing which way the wind was blowing, chose to surrender to the Americans. What happened next is one of the most morally troubling deals in modern history. In a secret program, the United States brought von Braun and his team to America, quietly setting aside their deep entanglement with the Nazi war machine. The man who had built Hitler's terror weapon using slave labor was welcomed and put in charge of building America's rockets. His dark past was buried because his genius was simply too valuable to lose. Then in 1957, the world was stunned. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, into orbit around the Earth. Suddenly, a Soviet machine was passing over American skies every 90 minutes, beeping down at them. It was a shock and a humiliation. The space race had begun in earnest, and America, for the moment, was losing it badly. A wave of near panic swept the United States. A new agency, NASA, was created to lead the fight back. Enormous amounts of money and talent poured into the effort, and at the heart of it stood Wernher von Braun, now an American hero, building ever larger and more powerful rockets. The same relentless genius that had served the Nazis was now aimed with total focus at the heavens. Step by step, the impossible became routine. First satellites, then animals, then at last human beings riding those thundering rockets up out of the atmosphere and into orbit. Each mission was a terrifying gamble, sitting atop a controlled explosion of unimaginable force. But with each success, one goal came closer into view. A goal so audacious it had seemed like madness only a few years before: the moon. To get there, von Braun built the mightiest machine humanity had ever created, the Saturn V rocket. It stood taller than a 30-story building. At the moment of launch, its engines unleashed more raw power than almost anything ever built by human hands, shaking the Earth for kilometers around. It was the ultimate expression of the rocket, and it was aimed directly at another world. In July of 1969, it happened. The Saturn V hurled 3 men across the void to the moon. And there, 250,000 miles from home, a human being climbed down a ladder and set foot upon another world for the very first time. Hundreds of millions of people watched, breathless, on television. It was perhaps the single greatest thing our species has ever done. Stop and truly consider that leap. Within the span of one single human lifetime, we went from a 12-second flight in a fragile machine of wood and cloth to walking on the moon. No generation before had ever seen a change so vast, so fast. The rocket had taken us from the edge of the beach to the edge of another world. It was the impossible made real. And yet that triumph can never be fully separated from its origins. The rocket that carried astronauts to the moon was a direct descendant of the weapon that rained death on London, built by the same man, born from the same terrible technology. It forces a hard question that has no easy answer. Can a magnificent achievement ever be cleanly separated from the darkness that gave it birth? Whatever the answer, the rocket has utterly transformed our world. Today, thousands of satellites circle the Earth born of that same technology. They carry our phone calls, guide our cars, predict our weather, and let us see our own planet whole and fragile from the black of space. The machine that began as a weapon now quietly holds together much of modern life. Long before von Braun, an American named Robert Goddard built the world's first liquid fuel rocket back in 1926. For his trouble, the press mocked him without mercy. One famous newspaper even sneered that he seemed to lack the basic physics taught in high schools. He worked on, largely alone, ignored and ridiculed. That same newspaper finally printed its correction, admitting he had been right all along on the very day Apollo 11 launched for the moon. For the people beneath them, the V2 rockets were a uniquely dreadful terror. There was no air raid siren that could save you because the rocket fell faster than its own sound. One moment, an ordinary, peaceful street. The next, a crater and rubble, and only then the delayed scream of the weapon, arriving in the sky after the people it had already killed. You simply could not hide from something you could never hear coming. And the Americans did not race alone. Deep inside the Soviet Union, a mysterious figure known to the world only as the chief designer was building rockets of his own. His real name, Sergei Korolev, was kept a state secret, hidden even as his machines stunned the planet. He had survived a brutal Soviet prison camp and emerged to become von Braun's great, unseen rival. For years, two former prisoners of two tyrannies raced each other toward the stars. But the road to the moon was paved with terrible danger. Perched atop millions of liters of explosive fuel, the astronauts gambled their lives with every single launch. In 1967, 3 American astronauts burned to death in mere seconds, trapped inside their capsule during what was only a ground test. The dream of space has always demanded a price paid in human lives, and those who ride that pillar of fire have never once been allowed to forget it. So the next time you see a rocket climb into the sky, remember the whole story. Remember the dream of the stars and the terror weapon. Remember the slaves who died in the darkness and the astronauts who touched the moon. The rocket is humanity in miniature, our brilliance and our cruelty bound together in a single pillar of fire. So let me ask you, when we reach for the stars, can we ever truly leave our darkness